Hey, it's John Carlos, and I'm here with.
BJ Brazier.
Yeah, we're back. We used to talk a lot of Bond, a lot of James Bond talk, but you and I have something in common. Many
It's
things in
rare.
common.
It's rare. No, it's not rare. But yes, we have many things in common. Yes.
But one of them is that our favorite movie of all time, right? Your favorite movie of all number one, because it's my number one,
No, it's not my number one, but it's up there.
but
It's
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 up there.
it's up there. It's not my number one, but it's definitely up there. And it's of ghost movies. It's easily my probably my second favorite. I would say
Okay. What is your first favorite
1408. 1408 is my
of
favorite.
all time?
Yeah, I don't know.
Wow, of
I
horror
love it.
movies.
Yeah, well, and not that, but also what's funny about 1408 is it is so clearly based on The Haunting of Hill House. So to me, it's just a really clean,
Mm.
really well done wannabe haunting. So
And Stephen King admits the haunting novel, The Haunting of Hill House, is as close to a perfect haunted house tale as you can get. So
I would imagine I would agree with that. I mean, my favorite three books of all time are Moby Dick, The Great Gatsby, and The Haunting. The Haunting of Hill House. Those three are my favorite absolute books, and they're tied for first. I could never put them in order because I love all three of them. So
interesting.
I have to agree. Yeah,
So The Haunting, the book ranks really high for you, whereas The Haunting movie is my number one favorite horror movie of all time.
interesting.
So Hill House is in our bones. It's in our blood a little bit.
It's true.
So
It's
what
true.
better person to talk about this with?
Then a
Uh,
Ghostbuster. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, there have been as basically there was a novel, which then 2 years later begat the classic movie.
Which is an interesting story in itself. Yeah.
And then we had the 1999 remake, which
And technically not a remake. That's the funny thing about it. I was doing some research on this, and the 1999 film could not have a single part of the original film that didn't exist in the book. So not a single shot, not a single added line, not a single added situation or character trait could be taken from the original
hmm,
movie. It was just another movie based on the book, technically.
right. But I mean, in layman's terms, when the movie's called The Haunting and it's about Theo and Luke in a house, we still call it a remake.
I would no, I would
The
agree, but
Fly, yeah, The
yeah,
Fly doesn't
right,
follow the
right.
plot of the previous Fly. It's still a remake.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
remade it. I just think it's pretty interesting that
But
that
technically, yes.
no. I'm not trying to be that guy, but it's just an interesting fact that I saw where I was like, oh, they
Yeah.
were told you can't use anything from that movie because we're different
Yeah.
movie companies.
And then lastly, there is the Netflix show, and we will just weigh in on all four. Um, the book, in fact, I was reading the book recently, and one of the interesting things, on just a personal note, as I'm going through it, about a third of the way through, about halfway through, I'm thinking, this is good, but I think this might be one of the rare cases where I think I prefer the movie to the book. I
Mm.
just think the movie works a little better. Granted, I've only been about 100 pages in. And then about 200 pages in, I'm like, honestly, I don't even know what to tell myself anymore because they have different strengths.
Yeah,
And there's
oh,
certain things,
big time. Yes, absolutely.
maybe one of the most cliched, overstated things of all time of well, the book, you can get into the characters more. You can get into Nell's headspace so much better. And the movie does a very good job with the use of voiceover.
Yeah, and
But
they do it in an interesting way where it's not cheesy. So
yeah,
that's where
but
Robert Wise really is killer because
yeah.
he does a great job of not making it seem silly with you know.
Yeah, but the book, yeah, I have this. I had it on paperback for a long time, but I recently got this
Ooh, nice. I need a
hardcover
hardcover.
edition. The cover's great. Yeah, Penguin put out a series of classic novels, and they're curated by Guillermo del Toro, and he wrote an introduction.
Oh, that's really
So
cool.
yeah,
Shit, I need to get one of those.
yeah, it was pretty good. It's neat. So I dig this one. Yeah, one of there's first of all, if you're watching this, I would hope you've already seen or read these. So spoiler alert in advance. This is
Yeah,
a
there is going to be quite
this
literally
yeah
nothing but spoilers in this.
yeah
So you haven't read the book, you haven't seen the original, you haven't seen the 1999 version, you haven't seen the the miniseries, then you don't want
yeah.
spoilers. It's gonna fuck you up. So don't watch
This
it.
is not a video to like get inspired to check them out. This is a post viewing, post reading discussion. Um, One of the things that I like about the book that it's weird because I'm so used to the movie because I saw the movie when I was like in high school and I've been carrying that with me for over 20 years. Um, the
Bro.
idea of Nell being, I mean, for lack of a better term, like a sad little person with her, we can get into her baggage later, and then being essentially consumed and falling into the spell of Hill House. I thought it already was laid out well in the movie. I never had any doubts about it, but I was shocked just how much richer the book really,
Yeah.
really jams its fingers into the clay of it, and also you're stuck with you're stuck with Nell as your narrator in the movie, and even though the novel's third person, it's constantly shifting into her perspective.
Well, and that's interesting too,
I,
because
I,
in the book, even in the movie, I mean, you start to see a little bit of it, but the book a lot. It's interesting how you don't know if she's imagining crap or if it's really happening. And the book really, really pushes that.
yeah, that's what I was saying. Is the book you really can't always trust what you're
Yeah, you can't
experiencing.
trust her. That's a great way to say you can't trust her
Yeah,
narration.
in the movie, you can't. You wonder a bit about how much of what's happening, the hauntings that are happening, are the fault of her being there. Whereas in the book, you're also
Right,
wondering, are they
right,
even occurring? And it's
right.
funny
Yeah.
because I was listening to the commentary on the movie, and the screenwriter was talking about how they met with Shirley Jackson once beforehand. And by the way, there's a band playing outside. Can you hear that?
Very minor, very, very minor. If you hadn't said anything, I wouldn't even noticed it.
Okay, so they
Yeah,
they
music. It's cool, man.
the writer met with Shirley Jackson, and he said that his interpretation of what he
Mm.
read was, my take on it is that none of the hauntings are happening, and it's all just in her brain and in her pressure. Is that what was happening? And Shirley Jackson was like, no, but that's a good
He
take though.
also
She's
could.
like, I like that, but no.
Yeah, no.
And she's maintained over interviews.
He was also saying that she had been his perspective was that she was being put into the nut house, and that Hill House she misrepresented in her mind as being an evil mansion that was haunted when it really was a psycho ward, and that her doctor,
Interesting.
she was in her head was turning him into the Dr. Montague character, and that Luke was somebody else, and Theo was like a nurse, and Shirley Jackson was like, man, that sounds great, has nothing to do with my book. So I wish Shirley Jackson had been around to say that to every other live action version of it, because I would have loved to have her just go, no, no. And I mean, we'll get to that when we walk through each one of these. But yeah, yeah, that was when I read that, I was like, that's really funny.
Yeah, another little thing that I'd heard, at least I remember back when in 1999 when The Haunting came out and the House on Haunted Hill remake both came out. I remember reading somewhere that the original movie was going to be called The Haunting of Hill House, but due to the House on Haunted Hill coming out like essentially the same time or like the year prior, they're like, we can't, it's going to be confusing. What if we just trimmed it to The Haunting? But in the commentary, the writer talked about how like he just asked Shirley Jackson, like, do you have any other titles that you would have called this? She goes, yeah, I would have called it The Haunting. He's like, okay, we'll take that. So I don't know how much of the House on Haunted Hill had an effect on the Haunting of Hill House title, but I do find it weird that both movies happen at like the same time, and then both remakes.
Have it at the same time. Yeah. Well, it's got that Deep Impact Armageddon thing
Yeah,
twice in history, which is weird. But as I recall, the original House on Haunted Hill was thrown together because another movie company was like, "Yo, they're making they're doing the Haunting of Hill House, and this book is like huge, famous. Can you write a ghost story about a haunted house and da da da? Don't read the book; it's got to be
Right.
completely different. But we want there to be some brand confusion. So can you call it, House on Haunted, something? And they came up with the House on Haunted Hill,
I
and then
think the
Hill House removed Hill House anyways. I just called it the Haunting. So it kind of, and then the same thing happened again in the late '90s. Weird.
yeah, the book came out in 1959, and so did the House on Haunted Hill movie.
Oh, so maybe that story is not real.
Or
I
they're
read
they're cashing in on a very popular book, because I know the book was successful.
the book was pretty huge. I mean, I wonder if they were already working on it and then they created that name to make people have brand
Yeah.
confusion with the book as opposed to the movie.
I mean, it's not a great movie.
House
It,
on Haunted Hill, no,
no.
neither version is very
Oh
good.
no, it's I actually I have a love for that movie because of how like low grade slapped together cheese it is.
Right. It's like the
That
original 13 Ghosts. It's like
yeah,
what?
yeah. And even 13 Ghosts has more. It's like a solid ground for a production than like House on Haunted Hill has. Speaking of the words hill and house, one of the fun things about the Haunting book, it's the only one that justifies like the title of Hill House, because the house is like surrounded and like being enclosed on by hills.
Yeah.
Something that the movie and the remake don't even touch on. It's just called Hill House. But I remember going, oh, like there's a reason it's called Hill House.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like when it comes to the book, one of the things that I think is so important about the book is, to me, the characters are more important than the spooks and the jumps. And the book, I think, has some really great scenes that could be done in such a horrifying manner. When they're out hiking around and Theo sees something that scares her so much that she just hauls ass, and then Eleanor glances and sees a family of ghosts picnicking in the middle of the brush. I feel like I feel like so much of that movie naturally presents itself to be um, shot in a live action situation, and not a single version did certain sequences that I think are just amazing. Like when the house starts shaking, um, and Nell kind of is giving herself up to the house,
Mm-hmm.
and the house is like shaking, and like the windows are rattling, and all that stuff going on, and that certain people in the house aren't experiencing that, but other people are. Like our four main heroes, the Fab Four, are experiencing the house quite literally, freaking the fuck out because it wants Eleanor, and then his wife and her boy toy, full on Arthur, don't experience any of that,
Mm-hmm.
like at all. Uh, to me, I always thought that was really interesting. There's also things described in the book that they never use, which I find interesting. I'm like, even when I was reading the book, because I got introduced to The Haunting because my dad, when I was a kid, showed me The Haunting, and I remember being terrified. Like I'm probably like 7 or 8, and it terrified me. Like it was one of the scariest things I'd ever seen. And in the '80s, we watched stuff that we really should not have been watching. We all saw Nightmare on Elm Street. We saw all these horrific movies that we should have never seen at that age. RoboCop, I didn't realize was as violent until I went back and rewatched it. And I remember being genuinely terrified watching The Haunting. And when I was older, they had this great trailer for the '99 Haunting,
That
and
teaser trailer is great.
even the first full actual trailer, I'm like, okay, they changed some stuff, but it looks like we're going somewhere. And in my head, I had the plot of the original book and the original movie in there already. But I saw that teaser trailer. I choreographed a dance show at a college that I was teaching at on a version of The Haunting of Hill House, like a dance opera. And I used the voiceover from that teaser. There once was a house, a bright, happy home. Then something bad happened. Now it sits all alone. Oh, and it goes, won't you come in? And
And
the
then the
house.
voice warps as you like push into the
Whoa!
house.
It,
That
when I
teaser
saw
was great.
Yeah, and there's shots of like hallways, and like you hear people screaming and you see shadows running, which clearly they shot for the trailer. I thought that was going to be part of the movie. It never happened. But when I saw that, I got I was like, yo, this looks like a genuine haunted house movie, because I love haunted house movies. I hate when they always deteriorate to just people being ripped into pieces and stuff, because I don't, at that point, as we spoke about earlier, once it starts turning into that, I go, I liked it better when it was, and one thing about the book that I really love is the anticlimactic ending, I actually find super satisfying in the book. And even in the first film, I think they handle Nell's suicide
Mm-hmm.
really well, and the book handles it even better, because there's more setup for it. But my mom's roommate at the time, um, I was talking to him and I said, "Oh my God, have you guys seen this teaser trailer for the new version of The Haunting of Hill House?" Which is, it was still called at the time, the teaser trailer actually says The Haunting of Hill House. And I was like, "Oh my God!" Like, and my mom's roommate he went to art school and stuff. He was art center and like great artist. And he was like, "Hey," he goes, "Yeah, that's the remake of The Haunting." And I was like, "Oh crap, that's cool." And he's like, "When I was a kid, we read the book in grade school." And he goes, "And we were scared shitless." So I was like, "Oh, I have to read it. I'm going to read the book," And I went and bought the book. And here's the funny part: I got a weird ear infection that clogged up all of my sinuses. I could barely hear anything. And it was the day I opened the book. It's totally stupid, but seriously, the day I opened the book, I had an ear infection. I read the book just off and on over the course of like 2 or 3 days. And by the end of that, my ears cleared up. And I was just like, ooh, but I mean, it's stupid, but
It's a
uh,
coincidence, but yeah.
yeah, but it was one of those things that as a stupid 19-year-old in college, just reading the spooky book in the dark
Yeah.
by myself, I was like, yeah, this is.
Oh, reading the book recently at like 1, 2 in the morning. Uh,
The
'cause
book is genuinely frightening.
the book isn't jarring. It isn't ghouls. There's no physical, like you never see a ghost or ghoul in the movie or the book.
Well, in the book,
But
that one at the picnic, but they don't really
at the
tell you what it
picnic,
is. They just kind of.
right, and even then, it's Nell's point of view, and it seems like a happy family. They don't feel ghoulish or
Yeah,
anything.
absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
But there's things that are unsettling, and as a personal terror builds, so does my personal terror. But it isn't from anything terribly shocking. But it still did that thing where, I've got the light on in the room, but it affected me enough that, like, the shadows created a silhouette, and I, didn't like walk into my bedroom door with a dark hallway. Like, it did its
Yeah.
job.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think because I think Shirley Jackson. I don't know how. Like even as a if you and I both have writing backgrounds and love to write and do creative stuff like that and be storytellers. We both have made short films since we were in second grade. But it's one of those things where like her descriptions and everything, for some reason, like if you were a technician and you go, this is how you write a certain all that stuff. Her book doesn't fit into any of that. There is
No.
no very clear act structure. There's nothing like that. But for some reason, everything she does, everything she says, Nell slipping in and out of what may be her reality or actual reality, and her opinions, and even the little lines like journey's end and lover's meeting.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why that becomes frightening.
Yeah. There's a
It
lot of
becomes
little
scary as hell. I don't
expressions,
know why.
little songs that sort of just weave in and out.
Yeah.
A lot of moments that just remind her of her mother, but it never says she thought of her mother. It'll just be like her screaming "mother" at a moment, and then just sort
Yeah.
of, and
It's
we know it happened, but they don't linger on it. So like we
Yeah,
just
I like that because like
yeah
absolutely, because one of the big problems also with a lot of the live action filmed versions of it is they feel the need to have her yell out things like grandpa and or mother, or yeah. We'll get there, but all of that stuff, it's so like on the nose. And the great thing about The Haunting of Hill House, I was telling my wife this, we were watching the original Haunting the other night, nothing is in stone with Eleanor, and that's one
yeah
of the things that's cool about Theo. And they have a lot of this in the Robert Wise film, but Theo Theo reads her mind the second she meets
Right.
her. Knows she's full of shit. She knows everything she's saying is, 90% of it is exaggerated or made up because Nell is pretending to be someone she's never been, never will be,
Mhm.
and is incapable of being. I think that it's really in the book. It's if you're not into characters being deep and complicated, like if you're not a Hamlet person, you're not gonna dig the book because at one point in and this is one of the things I think missing drastically from every live action version is, and something I like, is that I feel, well, because there's a certain point in the book at different sections where she fully falls gaga in love with each one of the other characters. There's a point where she's convinced her and Dr. Montague have the hots for each other. There's a point where she completely thinks Luke is hot and is competing for his attention from Theo. Then maybe a chapter later, in her head, she refers to him as being a bore and being kind of an idiot. And she's listening to him talk. And she's like, I think he likes me, but I think he's a moron. And then obviously throughout it, her and Theo go back and forth where you clearly see that there is a romantic interest between them. And I think one of the things in the book that is so important that they hint at in the Robert Wise, and I even read some things how they calmed it down a little bit, and even in The Haunting in '99, they calmed it down a little bit. But in the book, nothing happens, but it's a really interesting, I feel, take on this young woman who's never been alive in her head. She's never lived. She's never had friends. She didn't go away to college. She never had a boyfriend. She's, a virgin in every sense, like
She
physically.
spent the last 10 years of her life just looking after her mom.
Yeah. So,
Like,
so I
that's
think
all
that
she does.
this movie is her going through adult puberty. It's this really, really heartfelt, emotional, and painful story that none of the live action versions trust or invest in. They kind of tap along it like Theo's kind of a lesbian, but then even in the book she's bi, which is why.
Well, I'm glad you said that she's essentially going through puberty, because one of the things I took away from the book is that a lot of Nell's hangups with people all feel like very prepubescent minded hangups.
Yes, absolutely,
The
absolutely.
way she judges people, her deconstruction of Luke, while he's confessing all this shit about how he never really had a mom, and she's just like, oh god, he's so selfish and into this shit, and just like she's
Well, yeah,
essentially a prepubescent adult.
Yeah, it's funny because she, while hating how judgmental her mother was, and how bossy and needy her mother was, and how anything Nell thought, and it's all subtext, it's all there, how unimportant Nell has always been, and now this is her chance to break out of that and to be the adult
And
in the
in
room.
doing so, she becomes a bit selfish about her shit in this book.
Huge, yeah. I mean, I think, and this is once again one of the best parts. Since we're on the book, one of my favorite parts that nobody ever did in the book, and I always saw this as the opening of the film. I thought that when they always show her and the family, I go, of all the elements of the book you could lose is her sister and her brother-in-law and the car. I would have that happen, kind of unravel, because my favorite scene one of my favorite scenes in the whole book is her in the restaurant where she's talking to the little girl about the cup with the stars. That sequence, to me, for some reason, the way it is in the book, I felt like I was there, and her not directly telling the audience, I've always been able to talk to people through my mind. That never happens. She just straight up in her head
Like,
looks
hey,
at the little girl and says, don't you dare let them tell you to grow up. Don't you dare, you need a cup with stars. And once they do that, then they enslave you. And to me, that goes, here's Nell. And when you cut that out, you lose so much, context.
I think the movie conveys that enough. But yeah, it is a standout moment. And I remember thinking, not too critical, but I remember a lot in the book between her leaving her sister's apartment and getting, like, and then she's driving and she sees this on the side of the road, and then she wonders about that, and it's all serviceable, it's all great, but it goes on for quite a while, and then she sees this, and then she pulls over and wonders about this, and she fantasizes about living in the house with the two lions by the door. And then she sees the flowers that lead to this area, and she fantasizes about an invisible thing. And what if there's a princess? And then, the things protect this. And then she has lunch, and she's imagining her life, and thinking to the kid. And then she stops at this other diner. And I mean, it spends. I started to wonder, is there a fucking point to all this? And then eventually I'm like, oh, but look how much I know about Nell. Look how much I
I,
know, like, how
yeah.
delicate she is,
Mhm.
how
I
fragile her
don't think
psyche
she
is
works.
before she
Yeah.
even gets to Hill House. So, like,
Yeah, I don't think she works. I don't think she's an understandable character without at least that diner scene. Like her in the car and the stopping and all that stuff. I actually see, to me, that's the opening of the movie. That's where the credits are happening, and then you put her in the diner. And then throughout the story, like Theo does, and like the rest of the people do, I would unlock the secrets of, hey, I half own this car. It's my sister's. I stole it. My mom, there's no direct, like, she admits it eventually, but there's no like, yo, this woman is suffering from the fact that her mother died and she's been, that doesn't happen until the movie kind of reveals it. And that's like when the banging starts on the wall and on the door and everything. Um, it's, I don't know, like the context is already there. And so I feel like like that's all stuff. I don't know. I guess when I read the book, I get so much more of Eleanor in sequences, I think, that would benefit a live action adaptation, because I think, and this is why I would make horrible films that would tank. My focus would be the characters and the situation around them. The haunted house part, that's just kind of the frame to it, and that's how I feel Shirley Jackson did this. It's kind of like a Casino Royale, the ultimate spy movie is really about them playing,
yeah,
baccarat,
it's
but you have these
funny.
great spies in it. I think Casino Royale is a really good comparison, character study wise, to The Haunting of Hill House.
It's funny you word it that way, with the characters in the house being the framework, and we'll get to it later. But the Netflix show, while not following this story at all, is consumed by family drama and baggage
Absolutely, absolutely.
set against the
Yeah,
ghosts of this
yeah.
family. But I mean, there are times in that show where I'm just going, it's been 20, 30 minutes of just them fighting about family stuff. Like, this is fine. Like, I'm down with it. But, like, if you came just for a straight up ghost story, you're going to get This Is Us with ghosts, you know?
Yeah, and see, and that's what I like. I mean, I think that like also even with like Ghostbusters, the Ghostbusters is
Oh,
not supposed to work, but it's only about these four guys and their friendship, and nothing is said directly. Like, we went to college together. We're best friends. None of that shit happens. It's just their dialogue that reveals them, and over the course, it's just funny guys. It's kind of like the first Lethal Weapon. It's two funny guys that are in a shit cop movie, and
hmm,
you love the guys, and the cop movie is irrelevant, but Murtaugh and Riggs matter. Well, Venkman, Stantz, Zedmore, and Spangler are the characters that we care about, Dana. But then this horror movie happens around it. And I feel like The Haunting of Hill House, the book, more than anything, and I understand why the movies, they up the house and they try to do, jump scares, even back in the old, in the original one, they do that stuff. But in the book, it's so much more in here. And movies like that didn't exist back then. Like The Shining did not
yeah.
exist when The Haunting was made. But
I
I feel
never would
like
have thought. I never would have thought Ghostbusters would be a good comparison, but in a way it is, because I maintain that one of the reasons that people love Ghostbusters, it isn't like, oh man, I love the proton packs and them fighting Gozer. No, you love that movie because Venkman makes you laugh, because this relationship with Stans and Egon and Winston, these are like, there's a dynamic, and that's the charm of the movie. It isn't, oh, that trap is so cool, I love watching them bust ghosts. Like, it's cool, but that's not the thrust of Ghostbusters. And when I read The Haunting, even the thrust of it isn't all the ghostly goings ons, although they are creepy, but it is her interactions with Theo. It's, you know, Montague's ridiculous wife showing up. Like, it's
Yeah,
relationships.
and,
It's
yeah, and that's something else. Like, and I understand in 1963 or whatever it was,
yeah.
why the Robert Weiss film would alter. Um, I've never understood the name thing. Dr. Markway,
Yeah.
Dr. whatever. They've changed his name so many times. I've never understood that necessarily, maybe because they don't want a weird, is this like Romeo and Juliet? But the Montague thing, I've never understood why they changed his name. But the wife in the book, for people that have never read it, she is a ghost hunter, like a genuine parapsychologist, and she has an assistant that's very clearly her boyfriend on the side. Like, it's so implied that she is wealthy, she's the money,
Right.
and her husband is the loser, college professor that wants to be like her, and she does whatever she wants. She goes on trips. She has her young, good-looking, muscular, badass idiot boy toy.
And also,
that's all stuff that's never in any of them.
Montague or Dr. Markwade in the movie is a tall, strapping man, but in the book, Montague is like short. He's got like a beard. I think he's balding. He's a little chubby. Like, he is not like a hunk.
I never. It's weird because you're absolutely right, and maybe because I didn't remember the movie as well as I do now, obviously, because I watch all the time. But when I read the book, when they described him as that, I was like this. Oh, okay. And then to me, it was what's his name?
You always saw him for the movie.
Well, no, I always saw the guy before the movie came out. I always saw Liam Neeson. I saw Liam Neeson with the beard. So I didn't think of him as a hunky guy. I thought of him as a former hunky guy, that he was like, in college I played a little, this, because he plays sports in it.
Yeah.
Because he, in the book they play croquet.
Or croquet. Yeah.
Or something. And so he's very intelligent and very charming. I guess if you did think of him as short, fat, bald, and older, it would make the Eleanor thing even weirder, that she's kind of into him for a second. Yeah, but I in my head I always saw Liam Neeson. I like a Liam Neeson type. So when they cast Liam Neeson as Dr. Montague, I was like this. Oh crap! I called that one. But in the book, he is described as, like you said.
Yeah, and also he, even though it's his experiment, he isn't 100% like a believer who's driven the way he is in the movie. At least in the book, he's the one who mentions, like, obviously he's a man of science, he's a professor, so he's open to all things, but he's the one who's saying, well, this house could be affected by underwater currents. It could be this, it could be that.
Yeah, sunspots.
Movie, he's like, we're gonna go and deal with spirits, and it's Luke who's like, hey, I heard it could be like underwater currents or something, water. So he is clearly, his wife is way more leaning into the idea of belief.
Well, yeah, she uses that machine that has it, writes up. The room writes about the nun that's locked in the wall, like that stuff. I'm like, oh, why is this not in the movies?
It's great because I've always, when I know of Ouija boards, I've seen the little thing referred to as a planchette. I've never heard of planchettes being used on their own without the Ouija board. So that was something new for me. And then the way they described how they operate, it made me, I would love to go find out if, because the movie Insidious borrows like 90% of it from Poltergeist, but they have the seance scene where the old lady wears this mask and she's talking to the ghost and she's whispering, and then the guy can hear what she's whispering and he writes down what she's saying.
Right.
And the idea that like the planchette moves and then like Arthur jots down what the planchette is saying. I'm like, interesting. I like that structure. I wonder if Insidious borrowed and adapted that.
Yeah, I want to see that. I think that would just be so live action, so cool.
And it's creepy and Insidious, by the way. Jesus.
See, yeah, I think I would love to see that. Because also that, there's some free handwriting stuff, free association writing, is what they call it, in the Others, which, and then that sequence is terrifying to me. So I feel like if they did this right in The Haunting, and maybe they add in stuff like because I think Dr. Montague at some point says, well, they typically write nonsense and blah blah blah.
Right, and this is not nonsense.
No, it writes, Arthur, send flowers to your mother, you forgot this week. It says, there's a nun locked up in the wall behind you, which they can't do anything to because they're renting the house, and they promised they wouldn't damage it.
And it says like Eleanor, home,
yeah,
mother.
Yeah, Eleanor, come home, or Eleanor has no mother or something like that. And it's just like, and then I love that Mrs. Montague thinks that Theo is Eleanor because
Right.
Theo is basically well endowed, with
The
her
gift, the
psychic
touch.
ability. Yeah, the
Yeah.
gift. Yeah. Wait, what movie is that? Where
Kate
what?
Blanchett was in The Gift.
Well, what movie? What movie is it where they can read each other's minds that I'm thinking of?
Scanner?
No,
No.
it's a funny. It has a little more of a funny. Oh, dude, you're gonna get mad at me. The Shadow. When the Shadow goes,
Oh.
he goes. Well, I'm not that easy to read, and she goes, oh, I don't think so. Like that thing, that back and forth that they have in The Shadow,
The
which I
Shine?
well, yeah, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like Shining. All of that comes from The Haunting of Hill House, the book, like all of it. Even the kind of shitty sense of humor where you have a character's like I'm pretty well endowed mentally, like that's all Theo. Theodora is like straight up that character, and one thing I don't like is also they always twist her to be actually and we'll get to it, but the mini series, their version of Theo, I think is really interesting and much closer to the Theo in the book than anyone else ever did, because she has that shitty sense of humor, but she also slips into like, okay, we're not fucking around anymore, this is serious. And I like that. I in the book, the character is just so witty, has a shit talking sensibility about her, and then the second she's truly scared, we're scared because we know that she finds stuff funny. Like there's just so many of those character elements that in the book just are
She
killer.
she has actually I think the movie does a very more than adequate job of conveying her more about her bond towards Nell and then also her sort of agitation and
Yeah,
pettiness towards her.
yeah, it's kind of
That's
like
what
a little
the book.
sister.
But they
It's
do
a little
lose some of her wit. And that
yeah,
is one of the things that the show can achieve is that well we've got 10 hours and the movie's like we got 2 hours.
yeah. We
Um,
got 90 minutes,
but
man.
yeah, one thing I never really got a sense. I always when I watched the movie when I was younger, especially, I always got the sense that not Nell, that Theo was a lesbian.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Well,
Reading the book, I found interesting because I never really picked up on anything with her and Dr. Montague, but I definitely picked up that Nell, for parts of it, not like she's fickle, but there's signs where she has some interest in wanting Luke's attention. And I go, oh,
yeah,
okay. So there's a little bit of a crush there. Got it. And then later, she's also fucking over it. Then there's definitely a sense of a bond between her and Theo. But one of the things that really comes into play later is, especially like when Eleanor's hanging out with Luke, how jealous Theo seems to be, how
yeah,
petty and aggressive she is. And
yeah,
then
big time, yeah.
I had like that Scott Pilgrim moment thing where like gets it, where I remember thinking, man, so Theo's kind of into Luke. And then the more this scene plays out, you're like, oh shit, she's not into Luke, she's into fucking Nell. It's like
Yo,
the
yeah.
other, you're reading the triangle all wrong, dude. So it took me a second, but that's definitely heavier. And I know that I don't know how much of that was like I remember reading they I just accept it, and also it comes preloaded because of the movie. But because the book opens introducing, we get to see like a sliver of Theo's life. We get to see a sliver of Dr. Montague and a sliver of Luke's experiences before they come to the house. Whereas in the movie, we kind of meet them all with Nell, and she is referred to as like living with a roommate, and that she's not married. I'm like, well, she's not going to be living alone with a man.
Right,
It's not
right.
her boyfriend, so she's living with a girl.
Yeah.
And they talk about this big heated fight they have when she leaves, and it sounds like a lover's quarrel. So like they basically say without saying like she's living with a girlfriend.
Well, they
Um,
also apparently they shot a sequence for the
they did.
'63 film where she goes into the bathroom and there's written
She
in
writes it on lipstick. Yeah.
yeah, it's written "I hate you" on
Yeah.
her window, and she yells out the window, "I hate you too!" And then you see a picture of the two women, her
Yeah.
and her roommate, in the photograph, framed in the bathroom next to the mirror, and you see the "I hate you."
It's way
And
more implied in the movie, but and then the writer even said that scene no longer made it implied, and we thought we would just kind of go with it that way.
yeah, well, yeah, because
And
also
then
they were L7s, back in the day,
yeah,
so
but every adaptation, well, I love that every version that is a factor. It was a factor in the book. It was something that was blatantly intended by the writer of the movie. It was also intentionally played by the actress. Like that was she's talked about like that's how it was performed. So there's nothing too, there's
Right.
something subtle about that. And then obviously the 1999 movie, she's very overt. It's a very 90s like.
Boys or girls, it doesn't really matter to
Yeah.
me. I decide, yeah. So
Yeah.
stupid.
And
And
then
Catherine Zeta-Jones was so well cast as Theo, and then they just wait.
yeah.
The
Uh
casting of that movie to me was. We'll get there.
oh, we'll get there, but the casting's dope. But yeah, one little thing I found interesting as a comparison between the book and the movie is that in the book, uh, Nell isn't quite sure that she killed her mom, or she's in denial. Like she's like, I remember, because like her mom would hit the wall with the cane, and she would know to come and like if she needed help. And then like one morning she got up and her mom was dead, and she's like, did I hear the knocking? I can't remember if I did or not. I can't remember if I dreamed, if I woke up and then went back to sleep. So she's always had this sort of
Yeah,
guilt
I
because
love
she thinks it's
that.
her fault. Whereas in the movie, it is very blatant that like I heard the knocking and didn't fucking come. So
Yeah,
her it's a different kind of
this time
guilt.
I went back to sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. Which makes that there's a line in the movie that's such a kick in the nuts when Theo's like, "Oh, well, I don't think you killed your mom." What?
So good. Well, and it's funny because I when I was watching it the other night and she goes, "Well, I don't think you killed your mother." My wife went, "Whoa!" And I
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, so good." Yeah, that's yeah. So I mean, before we blend into the Robert Wise
Yeah,
movie,
I feel like we already kind of are, which is fine.
yeah, I mean we kind of are, but the book just to really because I mean I wanna kiss the ass of the movie too,
Mm.
but the to really kiss the ass of the book um, I I want um, I want to see that movie one day because none of these movies or and good, bad, or indifferent. I have never seen a true film adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, and I want to see the shutters banging. I want to see, and each one of these has elements that I like. Even the crap 99 one has elements of the book that get me excited. It's kind of like watching, the Batman movies. We all have each one of them has elements that get me really excited. Some have more elements than others.
Even
Um,
Batman Returns?
even Batman Returns, who dude, what's funny is that we'll have to do a review on Batman Returns and let me spew all the bile I have for it. But then when I start talking about the things I like about it, that's
I
when
know, I
everybody
love it.
he loves this movie, and I'm like, I hate that movie. And it's funny because my daughter's favorite Batman movie. I mean, she flips, but it's only between two of them, and she's 8, so you have to understand. But her favorite Batman movie is currently Batman Returns. It's
Yes.
painful. But she, whatever.
You've
And
got a good kid there, BJ. You've got a really good kid
yeah,
there.
yeah. She used to be great, and then something happened. But I showed her Night Before Christmas. And Scissorhands. I regret all that. But
No, you're doing it right. You're doing it right, sir.
but yeah, I mean, I really want to see, and I know that, and there's scenes and elements in the book that you cannot just do, especially if you're not a person that likes, which is a very outdated thing, which is the monologue. You can't do a Blade Runner monologue over the whole damn movie. So you have to find creative ways. I think Robert Weiss did that a lot, but sometimes,
Absolutely.
but a lot of the time he had to just go, I guess we're just going to have to do a monologue on this. And I think that there's ways to do that without it. But I think I would love to see an actual film or miniseries of the actual book done in the style like if I could meld them, but I want to see because I think the book is just so great. And while I love and don't love um, certain, live action covers of it, I think the book is really stellar. And I think that I think if you walk in, making an adaptation of it, and your focus is not the sexual social awakening of Eleanor Vance, if that's not your focus in it, I think you're doing a disservice, and I don't think any of these ever did that.
And
But
it's funny that you mentioned sexual because I know that Shirley Jackson um, really was blatant about how like it's about identity, it's about losing yourself. But one thing that it really doesn't, that I haven't gone for much, is sexuality. That is like a thing I kind of left out of this. But it's even funny how like you may have left that out, but here we are in 2020, and you can still kind of read it.
Well, I think I'm because it was funny
It's
because
more it's more relationship and pubescence than it is like romantic love, but it's still connection. It's
yeah, you're absolutely right. And my Joe was asking me, she's like, so was the writer a lesbian? And I'm like, I don't know, but when you read it and you read the book, to me, I'm like, and the fact that she's like, oh yeah, the sexual thing isn't really there. I think it is inherently there. Like there's a comic book creator who I worked with when I was at my time at Warner Brothers, and he said, I'm gay. So everything I write, he's like, I've been accused of, when I write something, because he was a big writer on Titans and stuff. He goes, when somebody says to me, you're, you write things, do you write it skewed because you're homosexual? And he said, yes, because the PC answer is like, no, I write based on the, and he goes, everything I do is based on who I am, and I see that, and when he said that, I was like, I maybe just because I'm ignorant, but I never really thought of it that way, and I feel like Shirley Jackson, um, I feel that she at least was bisexual because it feels so repressed, and it's
Mhm.
just under the like it's a Ridley Scott movie. It's got so much subtext in the book, and then it does come out, even when not intentionally, in every version of it, that Nell sexually does not know who she is, and I feel that the bisexual, homosexual, possibly asexual, um, the whole LGBTQ spectrum is covered in that character in the book, and I think Shirley Jackson did it unintentionally. Like, she did not intend to, but it reeks of it. When I was reading, it was Jesus. It's to me, that is something that I feel like if a director said in an interview, "Hey, yeah, we're doing this from the perspective that the focus of this movie or miniseries or TV show, whatever, is Eleanor Vance trying to find out who she is sexually," I would go, "Cool, somebody gets the book. I'm gonna look forward to this."
it's interesting that you mentioned repression, because what I did before we did this video is I just read up more about the life of Shirley Jackson,
Hmm.
especially because this year they made a movie about her and her husband. They made like a horror movie, which is incredibly fictitious, but it's still a fun, like, what if her and her husband, and it's like, I think it's about her final book that she wrote, the like, we've been in the you know what I'm talking about, we've been in the
Yeah,
castle the whole
we,
time.
we always lived in the castle.
Yeah, I think the premise of the movie is that like that book was inspired by this couple that they met, and it feels very like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and like the influence that that had. It's a what if comic.
Well, and
However,
that book is going to come up again when we get to the miniseries. But
and there's a
yeah,
movie that came out like 2 years ago. I haven't seen it, but I want
I
to.
got to see it. Yeah, I want to see it because I
Alexandra Daddario's in it, and I'm like, cool. I want to watch that.
man,
Um,
maybe I'll watch one of those tonight. But I would love to watch the one you're talking about, the
yeah,
fictitious account of Shirley Jackson and her husband. I think
yeah.
now I may
That,
be mixing her up with a different person, but Shirley Jackson, as I recall, was it her husband that slept? That he was a college professor and he kind of slept around, and was that is that Shirley Jackson's husband?
I don't know. I can't recall. I didn't read too much about him and how much, if he slept around or not.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I'm gonna
I
look up.
I
I'm gonna
know
look
that
it up, but I think so.
they used to like, I don't want to say they partied hard, but as far as like their social circle, they sure had like a lot of gatherings, and they like to have a lot of fun and put on the airs of like, look at what a fabulous life we have and all these friends. And like, she smoked and drank a lot, and but no, when you mentioned repression, the one thing I found interesting about that is, even though it's not sexual, I still have an idea at least where it could have come from, which is that, yeah, she was a writer, but she was also married and had 4 kids, and they had a huge house and several pets. And she talked about how, like, dude, like, I am maintaining all of this and cooking the food and washing the dishes. Like, I barely have time to sleep. And I just think about stories while I'm doing all this fucking housework. And when I think about Nell and the stars, the cup of stars, I'm like, hey, don't let them take this from you, because then they'll always have you.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Nell's repression partially comes from just the repression of like her time and her free sense of self.
And that's also where because I did look it up, and my mom is a big fan of Shirley Jackson. I know she likes Haunting of Hill House, but I don't know if her affinity for it is like ours. But she loves Shirley Jackson all of her work, and she had told me, and I just confirmed it, that her husband would was sleeping around. In fact, one of the last things she wrote was revealed the truths about her marriage and her problems with her husband. And I feel like so much, and also in the time of Shirley Jackson writing, in the 50s and early 60s, her if she was outed, if she was LGBTQ and on any part of the spectrum, or even transgender or anything like that, none of it would have been acceptable as a public figure for her or her husband um, in those days. So I feel like, just like you said, while this book is a repressed expression of her slavery lifestyle, um, I feel it also is her expressing, not even intentionally, but repressed sexual desires and sexual freedoms that she didn't have because of the time.
Yeah. You mentioned two things that I found interesting that I agree with to a certain degree. One is the idea of her repression, and two, as you said, like she doesn't really know. She's learning to know herself, and what to me is one of the biggest through lines of the novel. To a certain degree, the movie is this sense of identity, and I notice a lot of some of my favorite horror media has to do with identity. Um,
Specifically, the movie Identity.
no, that's not one of my favorites. No, but
But
um,
you're in it, dude. I saw it. You're in the movie. I've seen it. You're the main freaking character,
he
and I
thinks
love
I'm
it.
John Cusack. Everybody, he thinks I'm John
Yes.
Cusack.
He's
Um,
John Cusack, and I'm Chandler Bing from Friends. It's fine. I get it.
no, one of the there's a scene in the novel when they're sitting around talking about fear, and everyone's essentially saying that like real fear is truly knowing yourself or like seeing yourself clearly. And in fact, I wrote it down. Like Theo even says like knowing what we really want,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which
What
is
are you most afraid of? No, yeah, knowing what I really want.
knowing what I really want. And the fact that like everyone says the same thing essentially. They're talking about knowing yourself, truly knowing yourself. And then Eleanor is like, well, I'm afraid of being alone. And you're like, that doesn't really line up, because on your drive to the house, you're fantasizing about living in this place with a lion and you're going to clean it by yourself. Maybe you're going to have someone take care of you when you're older. And then you fantasize about the princess in this little magic house that people can't see that's guarded. All her fantasies involve solitude. So the fact that she's saying like, oh, I'm afraid of being alone just tells me like you really don't know who you are.
Yeah, and and that line. I'm glad you brought up that line by Theodora. Is that's something that sticks out to me when I read my first pass at it. When that I immediately was like, Theo she's a lesbian, because I felt it, like everybody knows that douchebag that is constantly hitting on the girl at the party or at the group gathering by saying things that are obvious, but in their mind not obvious that they're hitting on them. um I like, what are you afraid of? I'm afraid of this. And then looking at Nell going, I'm afraid of knowing what I really want. Like, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I read it, I was like,
It's a very
no, dude. And in the movies, they play it differently. She's almost like she's a playful, you know,
sure.
you know, Catwoman type of her. But in the book, it really comes off like she's flat out hitting on Eleanor in the middle of the room with everybody there.
Yeah. I feel like we're probably transitioning to the movie, but I will
Yeah.
say one of the things, and that it works in both, but it works stronger in the book to me, is once you set up all the shit with her mom. all the shit with her sister, or just how like unsatisfied she is with her life in general now. She's trying to get away. Not just get away, she's packed up all of her shit. Like she left. She
Yeah,
doesn't
everything
have a
she
real
owns
plan.
is in
She
that
has a
suitcase.
vague plan, which is I get to stay at Hill House, right? Fucking no. Although ultimately, fucking yes. But all that is creating like this little quiet rage underneath her, and it comes out. Sometimes it comes out verbally, like she will lash
Yes.
out at Theo.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very internal, and she's just judging the fuck out of people. She's judging Luke while he's confessing all this shit. But like bringing all that with you to Hill House creates like this thing where like the book is constantly making me question what's the bigger threat here, the house or like Nell being at the house?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because there's a certain
Because
element of, the
well, how
house.
much is what's happening, the machinations of Nell being there, like not
Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily her imagination, but her causing them because the house is getting its mitts into her scrambled head, you know?
Right. Like she was the final ingredient to the bomb. Like
Mm-hmm.
the because also the book does such a great job of this, and the original Haunting, which we're going into, does a pretty good job of, is how casual they bring up. Oh yeah, it rained on your house for like 3 days, solid rocks. It was raining rocks at your house, and you were stuck in your house for 3 days because stones were raining from the sky down
Yeah.
onto your roof. And she's like, my mother always said that those other people were jealous that they were
Just,
throwing rocks at the
yeah, it's
house.
neighborhood people. This is jealousy. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Raining rocks is kids across the street. Yeah, that is terrifying to me. I remember when I read the book, I was like, this is terrifying. And the first movie does a pretty good job
Yeah.
in, not as well as the book, but it's obviously, but it's one of those things where when it's just kind of a casual, like, oh yeah, by the way, it rained rocks on my house for 3 days, and the sheriff made a record of it, say, making it my fault, da, da, da. And she was a little girl, so
Mm.
she doesn't really remember the
And
situation
of course she'll
completely.
believe her mom. Oh,
Yeah,
that's the other thing is that Shirley Jackson, I know that like had a very oppressive, judgmental mom. I think there was some sort of conflict that Shirley Jackson married a Jewish guy, and like I could see. I don't want to say animosity because I don't know enough, but enough of that harboring some sort of animus towards your mom and how that translates into Nell. Um,
yeah. And then that
there's a
just,
lot.
yeah, that just lends itself to my other feelings, that I feel that, and these are completely my opinions, but that Shirley Jackson was repressed sexually, because the Eleanor character to me is Shirley Jackson, inside screaming, "This is who I am. This is what's going through my head,
I
and I
want
don't
to
know how
read
to
more because I
see
do
what."
know that like I want to read more about her because I know that like her and her husband, like the faculty got to like live on the at the campus. Her husband was a teacher, but she was like, no, 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 let's get our own place. So they were kind of away from the campus, and they got to like have more not bougie, but like had more eccentric friends and had them come over and I feel like she was in at least as an adult she allowed herself access to more open-minded people. So I don't know, but just
Yeah,
the
yeah, well, yeah. You definitely get the feeling that the older she got, the more open she was, and her
sure,
friend, her life became more and more private the older she got, which is
yeah,
interesting.
I can see that.
Her last book was about what a shit show her marriage was, but her life became more and more private, kind of like the one of the original owners of Hill House in the book, the lady who the house is left to, and she was taking care of the dying person that lived there,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. There's also a very heavy do they were lesbians, and the old lady left it to her lover,
Right.
who, so
Yes.
yeah, there's a lot of that there. So I really feel that
And
yeah.
you know what else, there's a lot here I didn't there's a lot of the sense of art of family being like Nell is there in a weird way there are times where I can kind of relate to her. Like I used to like I wasn't the most popular kid when I was little, and I remember sometimes like I'd get invited to like hang out with some of the cooler kids in the theater group and all that. And I remember like kind of thinking to myself, like, I'm actually like hanging out with the cool kids right now. Like this is where I'm at. I'm here hanging out with them. And there is a lot of Nell being very aware of like, this is where I am. I'm here in this room with these people and they all like me. I like them. And she's constantly like reaffirming her place and her presence and
Yeah.
creating this sense of family. Like even after the first night, they come downstairs and she's like, we're like a little family. Like we're coming down to the table and we're eating at the exact same spots that we were last night. And we all like each other. And
Well, yeah, there's definitely a sense of that I'm with the cool kids when
but
they're going.
also she's finding a family that like
Yeah,
she wasn't getting that support at home and she's trying to force it on these people now, but also not just them, but it's not in the movie, but the crane has two daughters and it's like these sisters that are bickering over who gets the house, and
yeah,
ultimately the one gets older and gives it to her lover slash caretaker, and now that sister is like fighting her over it. But even before we get to this group, family has always been this kind of dynamic in the story of Hill House, and that to me, it weaves its way through the book too, that she's trying to create a force of family out of these people. And that's the sad thing, is that like she's making these fantasies up, right? Like she's driving to the house and she's fantasizing about living in this house. She's fantasizing about living in that house. And now she's sort of fantasizing and making these people her family. And like Theo is like one of the only ones that kind of tries to burst the bubble a few times and is aware that like, no, like after this summer, like we're fucking gone. And even when Nell's leaving the house, she's like, but I'm going to stay with you, Theo. And she's like, no, you're not. Like, no, I'm going to come to the city you live in then, and we can still hang out and we can go to lunch and I can buy a cup with stars in it. And it's like, no. She even says like, do you always invite yourself into people who don't want you? But she's forcing family on
yeah,
everybody.
yeah. I
And
don't I don't take strays. Yeah,
yeah, it's interesting that she brings that baggage with her to the house. And one of the biggest motifs in the book that I felt was just this idea, and it comes from Shirley Jackson and like her mom's influence on her and then her life, is like how much does like Nell have an influence on her environment, or how much does the environment have influence on Nell, and like that line and when it gets blurred and how we're not really sure who's influencing what or what's influencing who. Um, but yeah, that was my big takeaway from the book.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then just the irony at the end of like, she says that she's like, we know that she claims to be afraid of being alone, yet she fantasizes about being alone. And then she dies alone in her car. And if she is truly, because we never see like, we hear some kids laughing eventually, but there isn't really a specific, we just hear the knocking, we hear the sounds. Eventually Nell hears like a song, which is also cut out from the movie. Um, but ultimately her dying alone and ending up in Hill House alone is now like the thing she was afraid of come true, or the thing she wanted come true. Like she sort of got them both,
yeah, yeah,
and that's just fucked up.
yeah. Well, yeah,
It's
no,
a
yeah,
and it hits you harder in the book than it does in the movie.
yeah. It's interesting because she flip flops back and forth, between I would, I would love to live here forever, or this
Oh,
place is horrible. When she first drives
constantly flip flopping.
Yeah, when she drives up, she's like, "This place is terrible. I don't want anything to do with this place. This place is a nightmare." And then she gets inside. She's like, "Oh, it's not too bad." And then all of a sudden, she falls in love with it. It's kind of like Theo. She's revolted by Theo at first, and then over time, starts to have a crush on her. And
Yeah. Oh, Luke seems all right. Oh, he's a moron.
yeah, yeah. Dr. Montague, I have a crush on him. Oh, he has a wife.
Yeah.
There's little, yeah,
The picnic. I mean, I just feel like bringing this up because it was one of the few parts of the book that really freaked me out, because the way it unfolds is that they're walking. Okay, so her and Theo have a big fight, and then they both go outside, and then like they don't really say anything. They just walk together, and they just sort of feel each other's energy and sadness, and they walk together, and they just can't stop walking as they walk towards this creek, and like the darkness becomes brighter, and then the bright spots become darker, and it just becomes daylight. It becomes a picnic. And again, you're only seeing it through Nell's point of view, but she's like, I see this family, it all seems nice. And then now Theo's screaming, run. And they specify that like Theo's like screaming it in a time that we don't really hear a lot of screams. And
yeah,
I always, that's the scariest part, because it's the only part in the book where we don't see what Nell sees or hears or experiences. Theo sees something, and we don't get to know what it is. And me not knowing makes me just, I can't even comprehend it. And that freaks me out
yeah.
more
Well,
than
and that's one of those scenes that I'm like, it's just so great and
And
so frightening that nobody ever
I don't think
does.
you could come up with, like, if you said, oh, and Theo looked and the people at the picnic were eating human guts. Like, I'm like, well, that's not nearly, like, don't come up with anything. Because
Yeah,
you not telling me, even anything I come up with, like, I just imagine something ghoulish. Um, but one of the things I do like about the movie is I do find that Dr. We'll call him Montague. Yeah, Dr. Montague's wife. She has such a steamroller, loud energy. Like, I don't think I would have. Like, I like the movie with his wife being this, like, this doubter, like busting his chops. You know, like in the book, she wants to stay in the most haunted room, whereas, like, I don't believe in this shit. Like, what's your most haunted room? And then, like, oh, and then Nell's like, the fucking kids' room, and they're like, fucking Nell, shut up. It works. The fact that Nell seems to have a crush on Dr. Montague, like, that's one of the biggest changes. By having the wife, like, being like his opposite and now her competition, like, I think all that really works well for, like, the third act. Like, I'm kind of glad we don't have Arthur and her, and the
I,
planchettes scary,
I
but
think in 1963, I think it's the best of what they could do. I can see them going, well, there's nobody here that's really a doubter. It makes it more interesting if his wife is a doubter as opposed to his wife being, you know, crazier than he is. But to me, I really I dig the way the movie went. But I get the perspective, and I also think that it's at the time doing. Oh, I'm a parapsychologist.
yeah,
I think it makes more sense to have the Lucy Ricky relationship where it's like, come on, this isn't real. You're an
yeah,
idiot. What's the honest? What's the scariest room in the house? Why? Because that's where I'm gonna stay. And they
yeah,
try to stop her, and the more they try to stop her, the more she's like, that's where I'm staying.
yeah, that
And
works.
in the book, it's I'm staying there because I want. If it's gonna happen, I want it to happen to me. It's kind of a 1408 situation
Yeah,
where and that's the thing is that's why when I watch 1408, I see some of that character in it where it's like I've been looking, bring it on, I want it, and when it comes, well, see, and that's the thing is that for her, it doesn't happen. She's like, I didn't hear anything. I saw some of this and I heard some noises, but man, that banging in the hallway, that's obnoxious. And I heard Nell running down the hallway, banging on the doors. She's an idiot. I heard the tree, you know, slapping against my window. How obnoxious is that? The plumbing here is loud. This place sucks. The only thing I got was that writing that said, something about Nell and hell, she probably caused it to happen. I like all that, and and like I said, I think it works the way it does in the movie, but the book, I want to see that at least once.
sure.
Give me. I don't want to see a take on Batman for once. Just don't do a take. Just take the Killing Joke and you film it and you put him in those costumes and you light it like that. You make the Joker look like that and act like that. Just one time. I don't need to see someone's take on Batman, their take on the Joker. I want them to go here. See this? Here's, Denny O'Neil. Make that. And that's how I feel about Haunting.
The Haunting.
I want to see a Haunting of Hill House where they go, here's the book. Film that.
You got to admit, though, the movie is like 75, 80%.
I
Like
would
the
say, yeah,
book.
I would say about 70%
Yeah.
because they follow the cues, and there are moments where you feel, but I think now with more and no diss to Robert Wise, because I'm a huge West Side Story fan. I mean, he did make Star Trek the motion
Motion
picture,
picture.
but I think that now with the kind of horror that we've seen, the Sixth Sense, these suspense thriller types, even the TV, the miniseries of Haunting of Hill House, Hereditary, those type of things. I think now you can properly have sequences that make you feel unnerved and weird with lighting and with the color of the wall behind you, like bright red. Like because like I told you previously, I feel one of the adaptions that gets a lot of the characters motivations correct and they're feeling correct, is Event Horizon. I think Event Horizon is kind of a gory version of The Haunting of Hill House. Each character in The Haunting um, is in Event Horizon, and their motivations are similar. And the main character, which you're wearing a Jurassic Park shirt, so it's perfect. Sam Neill's character is Nell, and the stuff that goes on with him, where it's not the ship is haunted. The ship's alive. It has a consciousness, and you are stuck in its imagination, and it's going to make you feel. It's going to make you think. It's going to make you taste, smell, see. It's almost a Matrix mindset of it's going to fuck with the signals to your brain. It's going to make you think that there's blood all over your clothes, that there's blood all over your room. And then, like in It, where the blood shoots everywhere and it's all over the girl in the bathroom. That's all from The Haunting of Hill House, the book. So I feel like if you used what we've learned from different directors that have done similar type of things and you apply that to making a faithful adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, I feel like now you could do it. And I think Robert Wise did as best as he could in 19.
As best. My
yeah.
I'll take you back. My introduction to this was I went to a screening, Cal State Long Beach. I think the first year they did this was 1996. They called it the Widescreen Film Festival. And at the Carpenter Center, they used to have, they would take the proscenium of the theater and they put a screen to it. It's this giant fucking screen. Like in hindsight, it was like half of an IMAX screen.
Oh, wow.
And back, and this is before digital, but they would get film prints, they get 35 or 70 millimeter prints, and they would, my first time I ever went there, they were playing Aliens, Blade Runner, Halloween, and being 15, 16 years old and seeing some of these movies on the big screen for the first time was like a religious. I saw Blade Runner on a big screen.
Blade Runner is my number one movie. So
there you go. So I remember I went to see West Side Story, and sometimes they'd have guests doing Q&As before or after. And I saw West Side Story, and the special guest was Robert Wise, and he was taking questions from the audience.
What?
Yeah.
You want to see Robert Wise do a Q&A?
Yeah. I was only like 15 or 16 years old, but yeah.
What a piece of shit. You're an asshole. I don't even like you anymore. Our friendship is over. I mean, dude, West Side Story, having nothing about The Haunting, but West Side Story is easily one of the best movies ever made.
I think it's the best movie musical ever filmed.
I will co-sign with you on that. That and Hello, Dolly are probably the best film versions of musicals because you're watching it going, this is a musical? Like, you don't even go like, oh God, it's time for a song. It's just that good. West Side Story just happens, and then when Tony starts singing something, or you're just like, yeah, that's where I'm at. Robert Wise does an incredible job of making it not stretch and go on, because so often now when I watch musicals, even ones I like, I go like, oh Jesus, it's time for a song. And West Side Story, and I do feel Hello, Dolly is the same way. There's not a, hey, let's do a song. Like, that doesn't happen. And I think that Robert Wise killed that in West Side Story. Just killed it.
I don't have time to go into all the reasons why I love West Side Story.
We'll have to do that conversation.
But what was fun was, even though it was a Q&A for the movie screening of West Side Story, some goob asked a question about Citizen Kane, because he was the editor of Citizen Kane before he went on to direct things on his own. And some other goob asked, I say goob like I'm one of my own, asked him about The Haunting. And I'm like, what's The Haunting? And my dad was like, oh, we need to get you to see The fucking Haunting.
Your dad was like, he was the gateway to great films, man. He knew.
My dad was the gateway to 2001.
Yeah, well, see, my dad was nowhere near as, my dad is nowhere as cool as your dad ever was. But my dad was he's the one that showed me The Haunting and 2001 and Blade Runner and opened my mind.
My dad's not even a horror guy, but he's like, but this movie though.
Yeah.
Like Claire Bloom in this movie, you got to see. And I just remember, even though I hadn't seen the movie, it just was stuck in my head that Robert Wise was talking about, like, the challenge of the house needed to be a character.
Yes.
And how, like, all of our exterior shots and even just like our push-ins, or even just like the mood of like, we're ending a scene. I had to create not just a sense of dread, but that the house was the fifth character of this movie. And he absolutely, in 1963, achieves that. And that's something that you can achieve easily in novel form. It's harder to do with photography.
Absolutely, and it's even harder to do it back in the early '60s in black and white, and all of that. In fact, I don't know if he said this in the Q&A, but one of the reasons he chose to shoot it in black and white, because he'd already worked in color.
He did West Side Story in color. Yeah,
West Side Story had already been shot. He was editing it when he decided to do The Haunting, but he intentionally, one of the reasons he wanted to do it in black and white is because he wanted to be able to show the silhouette of the house against the night sky, which was only achievable in black and white because the house was a silhouette and the night sky was kind of a cool gray. And yeah, so I think especially for the time frame, because his budget also, I mean, not that there was a bad budget for back then, but it still was kind of low. He made it for $1,050,000. That's what the movie was made for, which is insanity. And he pulled it off.
Right, and he did this between West Side Story and Sound of Music, which is just amazing to me.
Yeah, well, and but Sound of Music is another great, except for it does suffer from the, hey guys, it's time for a song, but it's
that's okay with me, but yeah,
it's much better.
I'm a theater kid.
Well, so am I. I mean, so am I. So, but it's much better than most. But but the haunting is interesting because, and one of the things that Star Trek Motion Picture does do well is the subtext between the characters and what's going on in V'ger, and the haunting is the blueprint for a lot of that. Oh, but yeah. You're right. Him doing that sandwich between stylistically, even he's like Dick Donner. Like you look at Lethal Weapon, and you look at Superman, and you're like,
and the Lost Boys.
Yeah, you're like, this is not
The Omen.
Yeah, The Omen, bro. The Omen. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing, not only is the house like have personality, but one of the most important things that the book and the '63 movie get right it's vital is that the house isn't a location where ghouls, ghosts, and monsters, like the threat, like the house is the monster.
100%. And that's one thing that when we get there, the miniseries does well as well, but it is haunted. But it is the house.
The house is the threat. The threat isn't in the house, and it's another thing. In fact, I love that description in the book so much. And I think I can't remember if they mentioned they used that line in the show, but when Eleanor refers to her, like, I feel like I'm a little creature that's been swallowed by something, and I'm rattling around, and it can feel me like in its belly.
Yeah.
She refers to the house as that tells you everything.
Yeah, it's right. It's brilliant. It's so good, so good.
Yeah. I saw the movie once, and one of the biggest. I'm stuttering a lot. I don't know where to start. When she goes up the staircase, that whole thing is all just suspense, right? And then it's time to come down the stairs. It's gonna be okay. Let's walk you down the stairs. And then the fucking little hatch opens, and the doctor's wife pokes her head through. I nearly fucking pissed myself the first time I saw that.
I remember, it's funny because I remember that made me go, "Wah!" But then now as an adult, I'm like, yo, that's so cheap. But
no, it hasn't. It's. Is it cheap? Is it effective though? And it's one of. You see a movie where they just rely on, like, I open the fridge and then they close it. Oh, there's a person there, and they do that like 3 or 4 or 8 times in a movie. That shit's cheap. I don't hold it against The Haunting, but I will say I didn't see that movie again for like another 2 years. And we're watching, going, oh, fuck, the fucking staircase is coming up. God damn it. And now I watch it and I'm fine. Because
it's funny because
I've been deflated for me. It doesn't affect me at all anymore.
I forget about it. I have to admittedly say I've seen it a few times that I watch The Haunting. When it happens, I forget that it's there. Because I'm also slipping into the book, because in the book, the trap door, Nell is trying to open
that doesn't even happen.
Yeah, she's trying to open the hatch, but the hatch has been nailed shut, so she can't get to it, and that's when Luke gets her down. But I mix those two up. So when I'm watching the movie, I'm like, oh, he just gets her down, and then and I was like, oh, okay, well, there's that, and I genuinely feel the jump in me.
Trying to think how much ass of the movie I can kiss, because I mean, we kind of already half kissed it talking about the book.
Well, we haven't talked about the most important factor of the movie that you and I both have an obsession with.
The Russ Tamblyn factor?
The Russ Tamblyn factor, like there, if you, I know you guys don't know John and I, but John and I for decades, quite literally
At
have
this
had,
point.
well, at this point,
Yeah.
there is a common thing that he and I will talk about, and we'll just go, well, it's fucking Russ Tamblyn, man, fucking Russ Tamblyn. We do it all the time. When we talk about Twin Peaks, which we're both fans of, when we talk about West Side Story, I also my perfect fan casting for an
Mm.
early '60s version of Batman um, would have Cary Grant as Bruce Wayne and Russ Tamblyn as Robin, and it fits perfectly. And when I said that, I remember you were like, "Fucking Russ Tamblyn, bro." It's Russ
Yeah.
Tamblyn. Like, and Russ Tamblyn, if he's in it, he's gonna own it. He's gonna destroy it. In fact, in season 3 of Twin Peaks, he's not in a ton of it, but when he is in it, it's like you are so involved in what he's doing, that it's just yeah. The Russ Tamblyn factor is, if he's in it, it's a good chance that John Carlos and I are gonna like it because we both have man crushes on it.
Yeah, it's yeah. I was actually going to mention this earlier when we were talking about his wife and how there isn't a doubter in the movie. There is a doubter. It's Luke. But what's fun is by that point he's come around. So
Yes.
now we need a doubter because, for me, my favorite moment in the movie, as far as not even like the biggest thing, but just the thing that I feel the most when I watch it, like I relate to, is when they're and they do it in the book too. Like Nell and Theo experience pounding in the room, and then there's another night where all 4 of them are in a room, and they do this in the movie.
Yes.
And when the door starts pushing, and all this shit's happening at the door, and we cut to fucking Ross Tamlin's face and his fucking eyes,
Yeah. Yeah. There's this
and
shot
he
where he's like this,
drops
and
the
he's like,
glass,
so good, so
and
good.
yeah, like, hey, I'll sell you the house cheap. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He goes, hey Doc, I'll sell you the house cheap. So good, so good.
that's another thing. The Not to get off Russ Tamblyn, but not to get off Russ Tamblyn.
Yeah,
Um,
Russ Tamblyn.
no, the
Fucking Russ
one thing I
Tamblyn,
noticed about the
Russ
book,
Tamblyn.
the movie does it maybe 2 or 3 times, but the book is full of what I can only describe now, even though I'm sure it's existed before, but very late 20th century, early 21st century uh, deflating of beats with humor.
Yes,
It's a
yes,
very,
yes, yes.
I know you don't like this guy, it's a very Joss Whedon thing to have the dry sarcastic line deflate the moment, and it happens so much in the book, to the point where I just naturally think that Theo and Luke are just kind of witty characters. I mean, they get to the house and immediately like, hi, who are you? Like, oh, well, I'm a courtesan. Oh, well, I'm a princess. And the whole thing just sort of keeps rolling from there. All
Yeah,
these
see, it's not that I don't like that he does that. I just think that he does it shitty.
I get it. But the movie only does that a small handful of times, which I think works in its favor. And one of them is this one of the scariest scenes, and fucking Luke's face. And then, hey Doc, I'll sell you the house for cheap.
I love that. Well, I also love when he starts doing the, being a dancer and a
Oh yeah,
gymnast. When he starts doing and there's going to be chorus girls, and then he starts doing the kick line. It's like la da da, and then the
and shakes and he
drum
jumps.
gets off. I love that. I think that's one of those scenes that in the movie I'm like, they have completely the essence of Luke. They
Oh
were
yeah,
like, Russ Tamblyn, let him do what he wants to do. It may not be from the book, but he definitely, it's like dropping Chris Tucker into a movie.
yeah,
This movie sucks. It doesn't matter. Chris Tucker, make something up, and then Money Talks or Rush Hour comes out.
yeah.
And that's how Russ Tamblyn is. It's just like, let him be Russ Tamblyn. In fact, he
It's
didn't want
funny.
to play Luke originally because when he read the book, read the script, he goes, this guy's an asshole. And then he was forced into it. He was threatened with a lawsuit, and that he was going against his contract. So he did it, and now it's like his favorite movie that he was ever in.
I heard it differently from him, so I don't know how much is what yours is true or
Well,
his
it's from
take on.
him. It's probably more accurate from him, but
Yeah. By the way, if you ever get a chance, the commentary on the DVD and the Blu-ray, it's great because it brings in almost the full cast and the writer and the director, and it constantly just rotates between them. Like, but he mentioned how he was under contract at MGM, and he had to fulfill, like, it was a 3-picture deal, and he already done one. So they're like, "You're doing The Haunting." He's like, "All right, I guess I'm doing The Haunting." However, when he got the script, he's like, oh, I don't like this character because he's the one who doesn't believe. Like the other ones get to be scared more. They get to have juicier shit. Mine's the more boring part. And then he started to realize, no, I get like all the good lines. Like I get to be the doubter who gets to be proven wrong, and I get to say
Yeah,
the funny
yeah.
shit. He's like, actually, my character is really important because it gives the audience the context of doubt and
Well, it's also funny. It's also funny because even in the book, and especially in the book, and in this movie only, which is one of the positives of it, um, the Luke character is not one of the test subjects, which I think
yeah,
is super cool because it. And this is something also once again is missing from every other version of it, is that nobody else wants to be involved with this. So he gets this homeless girl who everybody thinks is crazy, who doesn't know if she's gay, straight, up, down, left, right, doesn't even know if she's who she is, what she thinks, what her opinions are, anything, because she has been a slave her whole life. And then you've got, you know, Theo, who is, you know, at the time wild and crazy and, you know, bisexual or whatever. And, you know, it has all these weird, you know, so the
she
judge,
wears trousers.
she wears slacks and
Yeah.
black turtlenecks, but the idea that these are two misfits, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the only people he could get were misfits. One is crazy and the other one is crazy, and the only person there that's like, hey man, I'm the only one that's not crazy and I'm here just because my aunt is making me be here, is Luke. And that character, you forget because you go, oh, these 4 people are locked in a house. No, these 2 people are locked in a house, and these other 2 people are like, and one's like, this could be real, I'm interested, and the other one's like, this is bullshit, I just don't mess up the house. And then everybody is in the middle of doors slamming and bending and windows opening and closing and lights turning off and on. And yeah, I think that Luke is so important because he's a character.
He's the Venkman.
Yeah, well, yeah, and like that, but he's also he's the Vakeman, but he's also the character I think that has, in the beginning he's a different person than he is at the end. I think they all are a little bit,
Oh,
but it's definitely because Eleanor is constantly mixed up and doesn't know where she is or who she is, but he is a this, and by the end of it, he's a this.
he goes from we can have can girls and turn this into a club to, you know, somebody ought to burn this place to the ground. Like,
Exactly, and Russ Tamblyn plays it so well.
yeah.
Good.
It's funny that you mentioned him going down the steps because in the commentary he mentioned how that was his idea.
Which is what I thought. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, watching that, I go, that's Chris Tucker going,
Yeah.
Rush Hour sucks, and then you know Brett Ratner going, hey, I don't care what the fuck you say.
Yeah.
This is the story. Say something goes towards this, and then he starts dancing like Michael Jackson, and the movie's a hit. You know, I think, you know, it's fucking Russ Tamblyn, bro.
What is this? Cigarette? This cigarweed. You better
Yeah.
have glaucoma. I do. I doubt that was scripted.
That so much of that, and that's Russ Tamblyn coming in and going, you know what, this would be funny if I do this. Well, do it. Let's see what happens. And then you go, that's the one we're using because it's killer. And
Yeah.
also Russ Tamblyn in that moment, you really believe that shit's going to come down.
Oh
he's
yeah,
for being on there.
because it's in the original novel at a different point that he looks at the stairs and says like, oh, we should have can girls come down here. I could turn this into a club. But yeah, it was his idea in that moment. Be like, what if I went up the steps and then I jumped and landed and caught myself and we can make a whole beat of it. And
it also sets up the ending.
Oh yeah,
very well.
Yeah. I mean, everything else about the book, about the movie, the strengths of the book are also strengths of the movie. It's very well directed. I mean, I don't really have much else to say. I do think their use of I miss, and I see this present in a lot of media, and I even see it present in The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. One thing that I've been seeing, I don't know if you've noticed this in like the last 10 years or so, but productions used to like really use shadows when they needed to, and the contrast in things lately, I feel like everything's got these sort of grayer tones, so the shadows are all at a less contrast rate. Sometimes it could look pretty that everything is at the same level of muted, and I'm painfully aware of it in the Netflix show. But when you watch this movie, like there's so much use of like black shadows in a room.
Yeah, it's kind of like the difference between in animation now. It's the difference between animation from 10 years ago to everything on Cartoon Network right now, where the colors are intentionally made blander and
You can
the
see
characters.
everything in live action now.
Yeah,
Nothing gets
yeah,
lost in shadow anymore.
absolutely. And that's, I remember someone telling me, you know what the problem with Batman '89 is? I'm like, there are books of what's wrong with Batman '89, and he goes, and an old friend of mine says, you can't see anything. The shadows are too deep, and I'm like,
Mm.
that was intentional, and he was like, no, it's because Burton's a hack, and that may be kind of true, but I don't agree with that. That's not why I have issues with Burton. That's not why I have issues with that movie. In fact, those are the best parts of that movie. Is that the shadows? In fact, one of my issues with Batman Returns is that you see too much. It's not
Yeah.
done as grimy. It's like Terminator 2 compared to Terminator 1. The first Terminator movie is much more gritty and real and
Mhm.
scary, and the second one is a
Very
little. You
polished.
can see everything. I don't
Well,
want to
the
see
first
everything.
Terminator is an independent movie. People forget that.
Yes, well, it's just like the first Star Wars movie,
They were
and
scraping to make these effects and these moments happen.
same with Batman '89 to an extent. It was considered very, like these are the guys who made Rain Man, and they want to make Batman. Like, what is
Yeah.
this?
One little thing I find interesting with a lot of the adaptations of the hauntings is that everyone's smart enough to generally keep the introductory text, which is repeated as the outro to the book. Of,
Whatever walks there walks
the
alone.
house has stood here, that's walls, yeah.
100 years,
Um,
yeah, may stand 100 more, and whatever walks there walks alone.
But it's creepy in the haunting movie that they tweak it. So now it's Eleanor saying it, and she
Yeah,
says, and now whatever walks here, like, we walk alone. And
yeah, I love
she
it.
says,
It's got a venom. It's got a
we
venom
still
almost.
gives me goosebumps. And then
Well,
also,
that last shot in that movie, even the oh my god, like because I just watched it the other night, so it's still in my head. One thing that's great is that because the car accident in the book, in my head I've always pictured her kind of graphically flying out of the window and it being real graphic and you being like, oh my god, and them running over, and then we don't see it because it would kind of cheapen the movie. But they have this great shot of the car kind
mm,
of like pinned up against the tree,
yeah,
and and they do it kind of the same shot in the Dark Knight Rises, where you've got Talia al Ghul like this in the car, and and Eleanor is her, she's like this, and it looks
yeah,
real. It looks really real and is very jarring. When they show that shot, I was like, oh shit. Like, you feel like
hmm,
she's dead, and she's dead bad. Like, it's not just like
oh
oh,
yeah.
no, she's toast. And it's graphic without being graphic. I think they were really great with that shot of her from the side and the car is tipped.
Actually,
It's so
to
good.
me, it's even more graphic. Just driving up to the tree and just that the shake of that impact really just
Yeah.
stays with me. I do actually prefer. I really like the way it's handled in the book more
Mhm.
because she's really giving herself over
Yeah.
to
Oh,
the
I love.
house.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I
And
mean,
then it's like one sentence, like right before she hits the tree, it's like, "Oh shit, maybe I shouldn't be dead." Whereas
well,
the
yeah, yeah. She goes.
movie,
She goes. She
she's
says, "What am
ready
I
to give
doing? Why
herself
aren't they
over.
stopping me?" Bam.
Right. She has more time to doubt it before she dies in the movie, and I think it's
Yeah,
way
the
creepier.
book is like book is like
She's
I'm gonna
100%
take
drank the
you.
Kool-Aid in the book.
Yeah, she's like this is where
And
I should be. This is my home. Da 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 da. Wait, why am I doing this? Why don't they stop me?
yeah,
Boom. And you're
that
just oh
that 1 second of lucidity, and it's like the second before you die. Like that's so much more tragic and creepy to me.
yeah,
Uh,
I agree. I absolutely agree.
yeah. The remake.